This is our second session now with Garret Price. And Garret, you have been planting a church, an urban church, using sport. We talked about that in our previous podcast. So if you'd like to pick up on that, how do you do that? Make sure you grab hold of that. But Garret, you're a little younger than I am.
A little bit.
And we have a generational issue going on in our society. You want to speak to that in general?
Yeah, it depends on what your perspective is, that you might think millennials are the greatest generation of all time, or you might think that millennials are the absolute worst and they are the biggest problem with this country. So and chances are you could be having some valid points on either side of that argument.
Well, I like to think that I, as a baby boomer, we're your models because we were you guys. We
Yep.
didn't want to trust people that were older than us. We wanted to do things our way. We thought that the old ways were not great ways to do it.
Sure.
And so I have a heart that really is with you guys because I love what you're doing as a generation. And yet we've got something going on in our society that I think in sports ministry we have to be aware of it. And one of the things we would hope to do today in our conversation is help people that are trying to reach millennials.
Sure.
And what is it that they're going after, and what is it that they're seeking? And I'll let you speak more to that, but I'd like to frame it in this way. Most people have been aware, or in Christianity, that they would say in the West, America or other Western countries, that we are post-Christian, meaning about 40 years ago now, in the 60s, 70s, so 40, 50 years ago, we started getting this move away from Christianity. People wanted to move it out of the public square, get it out of the schools, get it out of all the places. And they wanted to replace it with a secularism, the secularism that is just, you don't believe in God anymore. And they wanted to get rid of this God that we were created in His image.
Right.
They didn't like that. There was too much guilt, too much this, too much that. But 20, 30 years into that, people said, all right, I'm glad I got rid of that God, but I'm still aching inside.
Yeah.
I don't have answers for my life. Secularism doesn't give me what is really healthy or makes me happy. So now, I say that as a society, we are now post-secular.
Okay.
Not just post-Christian, but post-secular.
Yeah.
And the word for it now is spiritual.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
A spirituality. Yes. And the spirituality, I describe it as a Christless, meaning no Christ, Christless religion.
Yeah.
And we want to create a God in our image that we can feel good about because this is what I think, this is what I believe, this is what I want. And so I want to have a God that would say, yeah, everything I want and do is good.
Yeah.
And we're trying to create God in our image, and then we feel good about it, and we call it spiritual. And the research is talking now about the nones, the N-O-N-E-S, it's a growing group of people, predominantly millennial, somewhat the busters or Generation X, that are saying, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. I'm spiritual, but I'm not Christ. I'm not a Christ person. And all those religions are bad, but this spirituality is really, really good.
Right.
Now, the statistics are going to tell you that there's a lot more of the nuns, and a lot of the people that are answering those surveys that say, I'm a nun, not a Catholic sister, but I'm a person of no faith, non. It's really not about no faith, it's really about no religion.
Right.
They still believe in Jesus. A lot of these that are saying they're nuns are referring to a denomination.
Correct.
Not a faith in Jesus. All right, now with that as kind of a backdrop, millennials, help us understand what's going on with them and the church, them and religion, them and this spirituality.
Yeah, I think a lot of what we see is we don't like to be told what to do. We don't like to be put in a certain box. So if you categorize a millennial as something, regardless of what that something is, it could be accurate even, the fact that there's a specific label on it puts us in a box. And so we like to, in general, and I'm speaking in generalities, obviously, but we like to not have any labels, any limitations, any, if we work in an organization, we don't want to have to go up the pecking order to talk to the boss. We just want to go talk to the boss. We don't want to have to go through that chain of command. We just take me to the top. And so any restrictions, any limitations we feel like should be removed. And I think part of that's helped that is the push of social media, how involved millennials are with social media, that I could connect with, if I wanted to connect with LeBron James on Twitter, I could do that. He might not talk to me back, but I know that hypothetically he could be reading what I'm writing out to him. And so we have this concept in our mind that there's nothing that should be able to hold us back. There's nothing that should stand in our way. If we want to do something, we should have every right to be able to do it.
And therein lies some of the issues, isn't it?
Yep.
So you come in to the sports ministry of a local church, and you don't want to just be there. You want to go right to the direct. In fact, the pastor may not be high enough. You might want to go to the denominational head.
Maybe.
Or you're going to go to some person that you're listening to their podcast as the ultimate authority. You're going to go to them rather than even your senior pastor. How can we, as different generations, how can we find a common ground? And within the sports ministry of a local church,
sure,
how do we deal with this whole issue? Do you have any helps for guys like me? How do we supervise millennials? How do we relate to millennials? And maybe you have some words to your own millennial friends about what they would benefit from.
Sure. I think there's definitely some clear errors on both sides. We're looking at it now as millennials are continually getting a little bit older now too. They're probably going to have to deal with parents of kids in their leagues that are millennials as well. So it's not just the participants anymore that are going to be millennials, but even the parents of some of the participants will be millennials. And so
the millennials' kids are the ones that are coming to your sports ministry.
Absolutely could be the case, depending on the age range that you're working with. So that absolutely could be the case. And so, and if you're in any sports ministry, you know that parents are one of the most difficult parts of dealing with a sports ministry, and that's coming from a parent.
Let's give this a specific. You have a youth league,
mm-hmm.
and here's a bunch of 5 to 8 year olds. And as a boomer, I'm going to hand you a hand typed out schedule for everything.
Mm-hmm. Chances are I'm doing one of two things. One, I'm taking a picture of that schedule and throwing away the piece of paper, because why did you hand me a piece of paper? Or two, I'm just scrapping it all together and I could care less what's on that paper. I'm going to run it the way I want to run it. And there's beauty in that, but there's also a lot of problems that come with that too. We have the tendency to think that we are already experts on everything. You name it, we're already an expert on it. I probably already looked it up on Google. I YouTubed it, whatever. I looked up the other day to how to tie a tie on YouTube. So that we can figure out everything's at our fingertips.
Wow, you're wearing a tie now.
Right. Well, I like to pretend every once in a while that I dress up, but everything's at our fingertips, and so I am probably thinking, if I'm an immature millennial, and so let me phrase it that way. If I'm an immature millennial, I'm assuming that you, as the director, as a boomer, are trying to put me in a box of how I'm going to run this team, run this league, whatever it is. And so I assume that I have a better idea of how I can work with my own skill set, my own personality, to better achieve whatever goal that I have in mind.
Here's where this rubber meets the road for the
mm-hmm.
sports ministry. You would probably not even want that piece of paper.
Probably not.
You would want some app or
right.
some electronic digitized form.
Yep.
So that you can carry it around with you wherever you go.
Right. Absolutely. I don't have to worry about losing it. Yeah.
And I think that the boomers, my generation, are kind of like, well, yeah, I think I could use that too, and it's right here. But now that kid in your league is now being raised by a grandparent.
Mm-hmm.
Because the kids, for whatever reason, we have more and more kids being raised by grandparents.
Sure.
and they need that piece of paper because they don't do the electronic.
Sure.
And so how do we get along?
So first, let me speak to the millennials specifically. One of the things that we need to do a better job of overall is realizing that we still have things to learn. That the generations that came before us had a lot of the mistakes and pitfalls that we're continuing to make right now. And if we can learn from those mistakes, we'll be much quicker to our goal. We'll be much quicker to running efficient leagues. We'll be much quicker to having a better relationship with parents. Whatever that end goal is, we'll do that much more efficiently if we can learn from the successes and the mistakes of the generations that came before us.
And there's been both.
Right. There's been both. There have been successes and some not so much so. But I think if we can learn that we might not already be the expert, that I think that will go a long way. Now, on the flip side, if you are not a millennial and you're having to either work with a millennial underneath you in your league, or maybe it's a parent, or the members of your league are millennials, one of the things that millennials want is they want to be heard. They want to feel like if we're having a conversation, that you're not already tuning out whatever I'm trying to communicate. And even if I'm not right, even if at the end of the conversation, even at the end of what we talk about, we determine that whatever route the boomer or whatever generation we're talking about did have the better idea, did have the better concept, at least I felt like I was validated and being heard in my opinion.
Hey, wait a minute. I got to text somebody.
Sure.
That's how the boomers feel a lot of times.
Right.
I'm right here with you, but yet you're going to do this.
Yeah. There's something more important that I need to, attend to.
The electronic supersedes the one-on-one, face-to-face.
Yep. And I would venture to say that that's somewhere that the boomers have it right. The millennials in general, we've done a terrible job at learning how to have conversations, be able to talk to people face to face. I'll call somebody and I'll get a text 2 minutes later. Why did you just call me? Well, because I wanted to talk to you. Well, just text me. I'm doing something or whatever,
This is it.
Or it cracks me up. I see this all the time. Our guys, they think they're so smooth at, asking the ladies out or whatever. Half of them are asking them out on Twitter.
Yeah.
Half of them are Snapchatting. Like, talk to them. Like, actually go up to them, but they won't. There's a safety in that screen there that they don't want to be vulnerable.
I'm not into cyber dating. I'm sorry. I'm like you. Let's get together. And I just had a professor friend just yesterday say to me that in his class this week, two different students at the same time took a phone call right in the middle of class and started to talk out loud about just on the conversation. Now, to a boomer, that is the height of I'm a hedonist and everything's about me.
Yep.
And forget all the rest of you.
Yep.
That's the kind of thing that drives. We're talking and I'm going to text and I'm going to whatever.
Yeah.
And forget you. This is more important. And we've got some things we got to.
As much as I'm beating up on millennials, though, and I am one.
Yeah, go to the other side now.
Here's the thing that's beautiful about how millennials think. That I truly believe that a lot of the roadblocks that have, and these are just examples, I'm not saying these specific things will happen, but finding cures for cancer, finding world peace, finding different things that are big global issues. I believe our generation could be the one to fix some of those problems because or at least we believe, that we think very differently than many of the generations before us. Some of that is because we're self-centered, but there's a determination, there's a drive to figure out what's next, to find the next, the best, the greatest, and that can be problematic at times as well. But I think there's a beauty in being able to push forward maybe further than we've ever been able to go before.
And we should just say we're here at the Leedy Annual Memorial Golf Marathon raising funds for the
Yeah.
millennial generation, so that they can actually go and get a sports ministry degree, some scholarship money in that. We appreciate you taking your time here. And we're getting some background noise here with the train going through.
A little
and
bit,
everything,
yeah, a little bit.
Which is, great on the sound system. If you're listening to this, you got to say, what is going on? Well, we're outdoors at the golf marathon, so please excuse our trains. But Garrett, what you were saying there leads me to think about how help those in the church. How do we grab hold of the millennials and transfer them even out of the sports, fitness, rec ministries into the sanctuary? How do we actually get them as part of the church? Because we said earlier in this podcast that there's a whole group of them that are saying, I don't have any, I'm none. But they still love Jesus.
Yeah.
How do we capture them?
Yeah, and I think that's a question that people all over America are facing. That there's this generation that has no desire to be in a physical church building. A lot of them would much rather meet with their Bible study group at Starbucks, or they would much rather talk while they're playing video games, and they'll chat together on there, or whatever it is. They would much rather find their own way to do that. However, I think if there are things that not only are intentionally geared toward millennials, but doing things that the actual people in your church, the people specifically over the age of 35, that are actually intentionally seeking out the millennial generation, to just spend time with them. It doesn't have to be a formal, look, I'm going to disciple you now, son. But just, hey, I would love to take you out to dinner, because I promise a lot of those college kids are really hungry, and they would love someone to buy them dinner.
It's the same thing you started out with. It's relationships.
It's relationships, absolutely. And so I think if we're intentional about generations and some of the gaps in the generations, just spending time together, being together, finding that common ground, that I think that will go a long way, because whether millennials will admit it or not, most of us are longing for some guidance. Most of us are longing for, because there's so many that didn't have great family, that maybe they had a great, mom, but, dad's not in the picture anymore, or mom and dad are there, but, I don't have any cousins, aunts and uncles, or, man, I grew up just with my grandparents, or, they're longing for people that are going to be intentional in their life with spending time with them and caring about what's going on. Whether or not it seems like a big thing to them, it's a big deal to millennials and what they're dealing with and what they're going through.
I think of these words, authenticity.
Yeah.
That's very important. You've got to be authentic. You've got to be in a bigger than life mission. You talked about that earlier. Mm-hmm. I'm not happy just rolling balls out. I want to make an impact on the world.
Yeah.
And churches that are coming into this and they don't allow millennials to see how they are impacting the entire world, I think are going to miss out. They're not authentic. They don't have a big, as they say, the old big, hairy, audacious goal to get out there and do it. And then just the relational side of being willing to listen. My generation's got to be willing to listen and hear what's going on.
The CSRM podcast is a production of CSRM and their production house, Overwhelming Victory. Dr. Greg Linville is the executive producer, and Scott Stedman is the associate producer and editor. To learn more about CSRM, visit csrm.org. And to learn more about Overwhelming Victory, visit overwhelmingvictory.org. On behalf of CSRM, this is Mike Maloney speaking.